One of the buzz things for HR these days is how do you create culture? And so all of a sudden, people are like, like I have to create a culture. How do I create good culture? How do I create good management? Well, if it was bad before, it's harder to do it virtually, because virtually good management and amplifying culture has to be that much more deliberate.
Hi everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of All About HR. My name is Nelly, I'm your host, and on today's episode I speak with Jodi Rabinowitz. Jodi is the Global Head of Talent and Organizational Development at Zoom. We had a fantastic conversation and we touched on talent, not just how to attract it, but also how to keep it. We also talked about authenticity and happiness. So, without further ado, I would suggest you go and check out this episode straight away. But as always, before you do so, if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and like this video. Thank you and enjoy. Bye! Welcome to another episode of All About HR. First of all, hi there, Jodi, and welcome on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor.
I'm so happy that we could have you, actually. How are you?
I'm great. Everything's great. Just sitting in my home office on my, ball chair, making sure my posture's right, ready for the interview.
And I think I have an interesting one here, especially for our audience that's been following us for a while already, because I've obviously taken a look at your LinkedIn and I've seen that you sometimes post some really beautiful poems. And for today's episode, I would love to start with one of them, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. So here's the poem. I'll read it. Roses are red, COVID is scare. Time to surrender, dyeing the hair. A welcome reminder of experience collected, embracing what's real, aging accepted. I sport each grey like a badge of honor. The joy, the pain, and mistakes I ponder. Rocking the locks that tell my story. A celebrated life, accumulated inventory. The big reveal, before and after. My authentic self. So delighted to capture. Wow. Okay, Jodi, I think I'm just gonna go to you, of course, now and ask you what made you post this poem?
What made me post the poem? People are like, what have you accomplished during the 2 years in lockdown? Obviously one of them was letting the gray grow out of your hair. And while that seems, sort of trite, there was a certain delight in the ability to kind of just embrace who I am. And what was so interesting about posting that, because really it was just meant to be playful, although it does have to me, a profound message, was how viral it went. And by the way, it didn't really go viral because I looked up what viral meant, and viral means 100,000, and it wasn't 100,000. It was something like, I don't know, like 38 or 37,000. But people shared it with people who shared it with people. And when I asked people, what was it about that poem that resonated with you? They used the word, courage or authenticity. And one of the things that Zoom has taught me and is so special is that Zoom has been a home for me that has enabled me to embrace every single part of me. And when you're in a work setting that enables you to bring your authentic self to work, which again is a very sort of HR thing, but is true, you do your best work, right? And we hear this a lot in the spirit of, diversity and inclusion, that if you feel like you're in a place where you're accepted and you can be open about who you are personally, you get the best out of people. And that's one of the things I love so much about Zoom. I have been in work settings where people say, we love you, Jodi. You're so honest and you're so caring and you're so straightforward, but you don't belong here. Or I'd write a email and my boss would correct the email because the language was too informal. Again, another message of you don't belong here. And when people interview for jobs, and they think they're doing great in the interview, and then they don't get the job. They're like, wait a minute, like I did so well in the interview. What it means is the people who were doing the selection somehow understand how you may or may not fit, like what makes that culture buzz. And it has nothing to do with your competence. It just has to do with, your style or your approach or for me, your informality or your level of energy, that the culture maybe is super buttoned up. And so they're really deselecting you, and they're sparing you the messages of, had you been there, someone's like, we love you, but you don't belong. And so it's a long way of saying that it's important to be in a workplace, a work setting like Zoom is for me, that is accepting, embracing, because it just makes you want to do more, give more, and support your people more. So I rock my authentic self. I love every gray hair. And some of the gray hair does represent the pain of being in places where, say, you don't belong. So thank you for acknowledging the poem.
Yeah, I mean, I really loved it because I'm not sure that I came across something like that on LinkedIn before. So to our audience, I would definitely encourage you to take a look. But yeah, I think it's a really beautiful talent that you have. And to your point of the importance of being able to be authentic at work, I had a discussion about that with someone last year, and he said, I thought was very interesting. He was like, so many people put so much effort and energy in not showing certain parts of themselves when they're in the workplace. And he said that because of everything that happened over the past 2 years, that already put so much extra stress on so many of us, that just becomes unsustainable because you cannot just like keep hiding certain parts of your personality when there's so much going on already in the outside world. If you actually can be authentic at work, that, I mean, this is obviously is obvious, but like it will also mean that your work and therefore the company will benefit so much of it because you do not waste any energy on not being authentic, if that makes sense.
If you think about Zoomies, and what Zoomies have gone through over the past 2 years, even though only 15% of Zoom's workforce was remote prior to COVID, and even though we are very fluid in using our tool, we too, like that week in March, went home and locked down. And many Zoomies had, kids they were homeschooling, or close family or friends that were out of work as a result of the pandemic, or sick or died as a result of the pandemic. And so they were sort of victims of the pandemic like everybody else. And yet they still serviced our customers and did so with a hypervigilance around care and privilege. In some ways, Zoom felt mission driven because we were able to keep people employed. We were in the war room, right, with the World Health Organization. And while this was going on, Zoomies were also feeling the pain of it, right? We weren't, shielded from it. And again, because they were so committed to taking care of our customers, people's feelings, needed to be acknowledged. And when we talk about authenticity, one of the things that my group did was, in order to care for our Zoomies, because care is very much a part of our values, is we took time out and brought teams together and brought them through a structured intervention around, how are you doing? What are you learning? How are you caring for yourselves? What are you learning about your leader? What are some of the silver linings around this experience? And the reason why I'm talking about this is because people were, there was no hiding during the pandemic. If you were not bringing your authentic self to work before, well, you were now, because your husband and your kid was in the background. So, you mentioned people not being, as authentic as they possibly could be at work. Well, now people were home and there was no hiding their authentic self, because not only were kids or spouses in the background, they got a sense of maybe some physical space in which they live. And people were tired and they were emotional and they were stressed, and they were also prideful. I mean, so they weren't only the, sort of the harder emotions, but they were also prideful and grateful for Zoom, and proud that they could be part of literally keeping the world connected. So feelings were like, you couldn't hide feelings. There they were. People brought their authentic selves to work. And as part of the work we did with intact teams in helping them during this crisis by bringing them through this structured intervention, having them talk about their feelings and what they were learning and some of the insights and the silver linings and things that they wanted to take forward after the pandemic, that brought real intimacy and real connection amongst the team members, amongst Zoomies. So what's going to be interesting is there's been a level of, again, sort of open the kimono these past 2 years and understanding deeply much more about people's personal lives, what it will be like as we make the transition to hybrid work, right? So does this forum create a level of intimacy that perhaps may not happen if you were face to face with somebody? So I'm curious to see what the hybrid situation is going to be like, but undoubtedly people, they were just as authentic as you get, because we were, again, all sort of managing this crisis together, and people produced incredible amounts and incredible quality of work to service our customers. So uh, I hope that that is one of the things from the pandemic that continues, that we are curious about who's in the background. Um, and we do stop and say, how are you doing? And, you look kind of drained today, or wow, you're like, so you're in such a good mood. And we continue to, ask and care about sort of the whole person.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more. I also really, I'm curious to see, and but I'm quite optimistic. I'm quite optimistic, and I hope that that's something that we'll be able to keep going forward. Now, we were talking about the pandemic and a number of organizations that we spoke to here at the Academy to Innovate HR during the pandemic. They dealt with, yeah, a bit of a survival kind of situation. They had to fight to keep their people employed. And then Zoom was in a very different situation because you experienced, I think, massive growth, and you became a household name even more across the world. So, yes, Jodi. So, starting with, in your opinion, why does talent choose Zoom, and what are you doing that is different from your competitors?
Why Zoom? Well, for me, that's easy. We are such an inviting, embracing culture. We, as I mentioned earlier, care is at the center of what we do. We truly live and breathe our values. Our onboarding experience is all about feeling integrated and not focused on benefits and I-9s and all of those things that are important, which do have a place, but it's a place that's secondary to the welcoming experience and the culture dip. We use our tool to immediately get people into breakout rooms and get to know each other and learn about our product. We put them in a fake elevator and have them come up with an elevator pitch. And so, really, from day one, we help people embrace and live and understand what makes our culture so unique. And these days, at the moment, with with a very, very strong job market, a differentiator will be culture, no doubt. So I think that's one of the big standouts for Zoom. In Glassdoor, it would reflect that. People are excited to be here. They're grateful to be here. We have a CEO that takes care of people. And as I said, it's at the center of what we do. And so, not to mention our really fun product, and it's so easy to use. And we use it to build engagement with fun things with our backgrounds and things like that. I've made several job offers literally by the background saying you're hired. And so we I think we live our values, and that's one of the differentiators for us.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a really, really strong one, to be honest, because um, people know when a company is actually living its values, I think, and when it's not. And I also think that, especially in these times where we see this really strong movement towards people looking for purpose in the work that they do as well, and they're looking for values that resonate with themselves. So yeah, I think we've talked about this on the podcast before as well. I think that, yeah, they can sense it if something's genuine or not, and if it resonates with them. And I think that is a very important factor for people to choose to work for a company or not. So yeah.
I often get asked, or one of the buzz things for HR these days is, how do you create culture? And this is my totally uncensored Jodi view. If your culture was bad pre-COVID, it's probably even worse in a virtual environment. So, the if your culture was good and positive, and you felt it, that carries over, in a virtual environment. And so all of a sudden, people are like, oh, like I have to create a culture. How do I create good culture? How do I keep good management? Well, if it was bad before, it's harder to do it virtually, because virtually good management and amplifying culture has to be that much more deliberate, right? So the things that you got, the niceties that you got in the pantry, don't occur unless you make them occur in a virtual environment. The panic around, like, oh, I know, like, it's the pandemic. How do I create a good culture? You're kind of behind the eight ball if you didn't have it before. So we're really lucky that we had such a positive culture, and it is carried forward by our sort of original culture carriers. We've grown, two-thirds since 2/3 of our Zoomies have never stepped foot in an office. So the 1/3 that I would say, I call them the culture carriers, because they sort of gave birth to it. They lived it and breathed it in an office, are very strong and are, working to carry it forward to Zoomies who have never touched it, felt it, or smelt it. Right. So
Now, that was, let's say, the start of the journey that people get when they join a Zoom. But we hear a lot of speak about the Great Resignation, people who are leaving. And so, in a way, it's almost logical, I think, now that it's not just important to think about what do we do about candidates, but I mean, what are we actually doing for the people that are already in the organization? So, is there anything that you're doing, or let's say, is there anything that you think is very exciting that you're doing in the employee experience space that is really helping you keep people engaged?
so first, we just talk about what it means, because maybe your audience has a very different view than mine. Look, undoubtedly, um, during the pandemic, people had to sort of stop and take stock of their lives and their values, and all those things that, um, it was a time to be reflective and go deep, because you had no choice, right? And so with those reflections, maybe come some eye-opening thoughts, like, I really don't want to be in a city. I want to be out in the country, and so I'm going to move if work is remote. Or maybe I really want to get divorced from my husband, who I've been thinking about getting divorced from for all this time. Like, I don't know, just people had sort of deep revelations. To me, the Great Resignation means, like, you've sort of picked your head up and you've had this time to assess. And if you are privileged enough to have choices, great. But also, the Great Resignation is not for everybody. There's people that have to work, whether they like their workplace or not. I mean, we're talking about, a certain population that has the ability to say, I'm going to go move to a potato farm, and, that's good because I have enough money to do so. But what it is it's another reminder of what it means to take care of your people. We are always actively engaging our people in not only growth opportunities by helping managers give people stretch assignments and understanding what their career ambitions are. We just instituted sort of a push message every quarter with some prompts around having career conversations because people are so busy. So we send it to the employee, we send it to the manager, just a couple of interesting, sort of provocative questions that keep people to have a dialogue. And we know it works because we did it with onboarding. So we send those same prompts 30, 60, 90 days. How's it going? So it's not about like your work performance, it's just about connecting and again, building that sense of community. We're just always actively engaging people also in the fun. So we have something called Zoom Rendezvous, which is run by our Happy Crew, which is a group of volunteers whose sole job is to create fun and build culture. And so once a quarter, you just show up with a bunch of random people and for 20 minutes do a round robin. So those are some of the fun things that we're doing. And then in terms of development, again, I gave you an example of career chats. We have fireside chats with CEOs. We have all kinds of workshops around wellness and the things that we teach from a development perspective are authentic. So, in a manager training, we talk about, like, we simulate what do you do when you have somebody crying, because that's real life and that happens. And so I feel like even our development programs are a little bit edgier to try to help people with real life situations. So we are constantly thinking about how do we keep Zoomies growing, engaged, involved, excited, and I don't want to say doubling down, because that means that all of a sudden the lights went on and said we have to care. I would say actually we're just business as usual because we cared before the pandemic.
Yeah, and what I really felt when you were talking about that, Jodi, was that I really get this sense of connection from all of that. To be honest, that seems to be, yeah, what I'm gonna take from that, and I think that's a really important one. And it comes back to what we talked about a little bit earlier as well. I think I think that's a beautiful one. I'm also glad that you already mentioned organizational development a little bit, because I believe that over the past year, Zoom has developed organizational development courses such as Beginning Happy, Leading Happy, and Sustaining Happy. Now that triggered my interest. Maybe first we can start by why the focus on happiness. So how is this different from more traditional employee engagement, for instance?
I think it actually goes back to the beginning of our conversation, which is, if you can bring who you are and every inch of you to work and you feel good about who you are and you are embraced, you're going to do better work, which ultimately reaches our customer. Simple as that. Individual happiness. I bring my individual self to work and I'm connecting with you, and you and I working together makes good stuff happen that will ultimately meet the customer.
Something I was wondering about here, Jodi, is that how have you made everyone in the organization enthusiastic about this concept about this concept of happiness? Because I can imagine that perhaps not everybody was immediately feeling this one, but I might be totally wrong here. So kind of curious to hear your thoughts on that.
So I'm going to answer two ways. One is, as part of the interviewing process, we interview for values, right? So we're automatically screening out the people that don't care about, our community, ourselves, our customers. So that's like a disqualifier. But the other is, Eric's story, his origin story is, in his previous workplace, there were things that the customer wanted and the organization wasn't responsive. So the customers weren't happy and he couldn't get the company to align with the customer needs. And so he built Zoom, and the customer's needs always come first. And so again, the idea is, if you're making customers happy, then you're going to be happy, and like it just sort of feeds on itself. So we always put customers first, and it just works. So it means that Zoomies are a little bit, they're creative and deliberate, and if they recognize that a customer isn't getting what they want, they everybody just aligns behind to try to deliver to the customer, as long as the request is reasonable. And it's just part of our it's part of our DNA. So happiness is it sounds trite, but it's actually true. And then just from a development perspective, it's important to talk about when there isn't happiness. Where is the conflict, and how do you address it, and is there a different solution, and how do you acknowledge it? That's also an important part of happiness, is to address the unhappiness, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is a without doing that, you're going to have an issue at some point. You need to address whenever there is unhappiness, and that's actually then leading to something else I wanted to ask you about, Jodi, and it's the sustaining happy. What does that mean? You touched on it a little bit, but what does that mean for Zoom?
Sustaining happy, in terms of our development initiatives, means that every month we introduce a new topic for managers that is relevant. So, 40-minute interactive session introducing a topic. So, for our hybrid reentry, which we're preparing our workforce for a hybrid reentry, every quarter we will have a module around hybrid work, because it's going to be an ever evolving experience. And so, as we learn what managers and employees need, we will introduce those sustaining happy modules. And that's what it means. Just always keeping new content, new training relevant. So people are prepared and developing actively.
Yeah, love it. Again, um, now let's go, because this is a beautiful segue to the next one as well, Jodi. Because you mentioned hybrid work there, and you mentioned it a few times throughout our conversation already. Some of the criticism sometimes when we talk about hybrid work is that it has a tendency, or it can have a tendency to exclude the people who, those without access, or those who are not in the room. What are your thoughts on that? I guess my question is here.
I think that mindset is pre-Zoom. Um, and what I mean by that is, in the olden days, we would watch people in a conference room, right, with that Star Trek thing in the middle, and you'd have that one hybrid person out in the back. Everyone's laughing and yakking out, and they're like, "Oh, by the way, like maybe we should ask that person." Maybe or maybe not. They ignore that person the whole time. Couple things. One is our smart gallery. Our technology will change that, because even though you'll be sitting in a room, you'll also have, the boxes in front of you, which will create more equity, like so everybody's included. And this is new territory for everybody. And just like I said about building culture, you have to be deliberate. And we need to be more mindful of creating inclusion, more thoughtful about saying, "Hey, so and so, what do you think?" And I do think that technology will aid that, because everybody will be present. But those are the best practices around inviting all voices, whether you're in a room or not, need to again be amplified. So it'll be interesting to see certainly we are preparing our managers and our employees about, you know, having uh, ongoing conversations about what are your needs, and, saying like, do you feel like you're part of the group if you're remote and the rest of the group isn't? How do we be thoughtful about when we do plan a lunch, that we give you enough time to get babysitting or whatever you need so that you can be part of it live? I mean, those actions are going to need to be more thoughtful and more planful. And that's what we are teaching our managers and employees around. So we'll see how it goes. It'll be interesting.
I'm actually very excited to see where this will go, and how companies will go about it, and the best practices that are going to be created from this. Yeah, then I mean, maybe you can share something about this as well, because our podcast is called All About HR. So as HR, do you have any ideas apart from what you just mentioned on how can I prepare my organization for these kinds of transitions?
There's two things that I think we are doing. One is the mindfulness, right? The hyper awareness of the circumstances of the person, across from you. As you've seen from our blogs, we're asking employees to declare. Are you hybrid? Are you, not coming into the office at all? And that's never your intention. And so that creates clarity, and that's huge. So, and so with that clarity, there are parameters, and the contract is clear. So, one of the things that we're teaching managers to do is contract and understand completely the mindset of your employee. And in the same vein, continue to ask, because things might shift. So you may have somebody who initially wants to be in the office 3 days and then decides to come in once. And so that ongoing conversation and that ongoing contracting is one thing that we are focusing on for our managers and our employees. And the other, again, is the acute sensitivity of around inclusion, the being thoughtful and deliberate about some of the micro behaviors, some of your own biases around in office, out of office, and checking in. So if you love being in the office and you can't wait to get back to the office, and you've only experienced being in the office, and you have a new employee who's never been in the office, like, do you have some unconscious feelings about that new person saying they don't want to be in? Well, let's pay attention to it and make sure that that bias isn't somehow playing out. And so those are the things that Zoom is doing to prepare the workforce. So it's the mindfulness, the awareness of how I'm interacting, and also the clear contracting and conversation around what's working, what's not working, do you want to change, so that there isn't this sort of ongoing ambiguity, like the rules are shifting in flight. That's how we're approaching it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good approach. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, on to one of my favorite parts of each episode, Jodi. And this is the part where I get to ask you, first of all, about the biggest cliche that you believe exists about HR. Let's start with that one.
I think the biggest cliche about HR is, I'm in HR because I like people.
Yeah,
Have you heard that one before, Neely? I'm
I
not sure.
have.
Yeah.
Yes.
We do like people. I love people. Sometimes people are annoying because they just are. But most of the time, we embrace people for every inch of them, even the annoying parts. But we also love the business, and we also are energized by the business and intrigued by the business. And so that's one of the very HR cliches that came to mind.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. Now, and the other thing I am really curious about as well is I always ask my guests if they would like to share an epic win and an epic fail with our audience, and they can be anything. So we have had some personal ones, we've had some business related ones. Anything that you feel like sharing.
I'll start with the failure, because I didn't get my my size in on time for Zoom's 10-year t-shirt. So I missed out on size small for the 10-year t-shirt. I'm so bummed, because my whole wardrobe is Zoom. One of the benefits Zoomies get is a very generous stipend to the Zoom store. And so I don't own anything but Zoom wear, but I missed out on the small size for the 10-year anniversary. And now they only have extra large. So that's my epic fail for the moment. And my epic win, I have never in my whole career worked with a team like the team that I have at Zoom. I literally went into the sea of LinkedIn recruiting and fished out this incredible team I have somebody with a master's in neuroscience, somebody who is finishing their master's in behavioral science. I have master's in OD and teaching, and we're just they're so interesting and so different, and they are all smarter than me. I'm much older than them, but they're still smarter than me. So it's like Yoda versus like brains. But I would say that is my biggest professional win in aside from scoring a job at Zoom.
Nice one. I could feel it as well, and I always love it when people say that the people that are in their team are smarter, because I somewhere read or I heard several times that is actually a sign that someone is being a really good manager. So that was beautiful that you said that. Thank you so much for that, and thank you so much, Jodi, as well for this conversation, because we've come to the end of this episode. Yeah, I hope that you enjoyed it.
I did, and I loved your questions. Thank you for having such creative questions.
You're very welcome. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in again. I hope you enjoyed this conversation just as much as I did. If you haven't done so yet, please do not forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and like this video. Thank you so much, and see you soon for a new episode of All About HR. Bye.